happened in the 19th century, what has been established is that the idea that we're promoting today is not a new idea. It's an idea as old as Africans themselves have appeared in mass in this particular hemisphere. Because what we have to remember is that our question was an international question from its beginning. The moment Europeans appeared in Africa and started to take Africans out of Africa, it became an international contradiction that will only be resolved with an international solution. Right. We have to remember that. That's important. We must also remember that it is the media and the people who so-called help us a lot of times that often give a skewed version of what is actually happening. And by that I mean if you looked at the 19th century, you ask any black professor or magazine or promoter or what have you about what happened in the 19th century, there's only one seminal figure that you will see, and that is Frederick Douglass. And indeed, Frederick Douglass was great. You know, he was a great person. He was a person that was able to come out of slavery, to become very much self-taught, and be able to articulate a lot of the aspirations of the African people. He was not alone. And as Conrad will point out, and we have always argued, when you start talking about the 19th century, you have to talk about people like Henry Manlio Turner, who was a bishop from Atlanta, Georgia, and who felt in those days that rather than people here trying to fight over 40 acres of mule, you had a better chance of getting 400 acres of hippopotamus in Africa. That's what Bishop Henry Manlio Turner said about it. We had Henry Highland Garnet, Henry Highland Garnet of the African Civilization Society, who laid out a lot of things. We had Bishop Alexander Cromwell, who appealed to the free colored people in the Western Hemisphere from his position in Liberia to help in trying to come there and to promote the cultivation of cotton. For if King Cotton was what was holding our people in subjugation in America, if they could actually produce more cotton in Africa and put it on the world market, they could undercut the price of cotton and collapse the whole slaveocracy. That was what, that's what Alexander Cromwell was talking about. Douglass in turn retorted that King Cotton in America had nothing to fear from King Cotton in Africa. And there you had a side of the beginning where people in the United States, for their own particular perspective, had an opportunity of always being able to shoot down ideas that talk about the connection between Africans as those at home and those abroad. We saw the fact that you had, you know, Martin Robeson Delaney, Harvard grad, person who became a medical doctor, and whoever decided the first delegation to go to Africa to look about the possibilities of black people there being able to struggle and help in the development of Africa. We saw all of these people come together. You know, when you start to talk about Martin Robeson Delaney, you got to talk about Edward Wilmot Blyden. Blyden, who in 1862 called for the development of some African power. He was very precise, not just black power, but African power in Africa. And he went to Africa to show how it could be done and establishing the University of Liberia and also similar educational institutions in Sierra Leone. And was the first person to ever talk about, you know, the idea of wearing African clothes in Africa, although most often he wore Western dress too, when he started the African Reformed Dress Society. He tried to show black people in Africa in 100-degree heat, you didn't have to walk around with no three-piece suit, vests and everything else. That was stupid. I mean, little things like that that we take for granted, but yet it was very symbolic in our movement here. And we have to understand that these people who did it, and lots of people who I could talk about in this particular period, but the point is being made that it was more than just, you know, Frederick Douglass. And we don't get a chance to see that. And the reason is because anybody who actually talks about self-determination in relation to the struggle in Africa and tying those two things up, those are the people who always will be overlooked in society unless you're a flake and a fake. When that happens, you can be promoted a lot of times because they're not interested in that happening. The idea is that they did everything they do to make us forget Africa when they brought us here, and they're not going to do anything to make us remember Africa, since that was never their intention in the first place. As Carlos Cooks pointed out many years ago, do you believe that the white man is going to educate your child to compete with his? No chance. There's no way in the world. That's not just a rhetorical question, that's a question of fact. The thing is that there's no way in the world that you're going to expect for them to do that. And if you're not going to expect them to do that, so why should you entrust your children with their education? You can't do that at all. The idea is that African people have to be responsible for the education of their own people. Is the only way to guarantee that they're going to be African children. Else you would have a situation like a little young black boy named Michael Jackson growing up into be a white woman. You know, because in effect, that's basically see what we have here. If you look at the image-wise, what you're seeing is an African child that has grown up to have the image of a white woman. Now that's not a kind of a derogatory remark. That is a fact, because you cannot tell the difference. As a matter of fact, he looks whiter than Lisa, his wife, when you start looking at him on the photo. So if we have that kind of confusion, you know, if we don't speak clear on a question like that, what do we expect our people to do? What are our youth supposed to do if there's no clarity? You have to have clarity on the question, because we're dealing with the psychology of our people, and the psyche is the most important thing that no one has ever done. With the African psyche is what was stolen from us, and until we get that back, we're never going to be anything but Negroes. How else do you have a situation when, what have we spoken about before when Utrice was here, and what she's been speaking on all this week, all of us have been doing it. I called down to NABJ headquarters. The National Association of Black Journalists is supposed to NABJ. It's really about Negroes, about bull and, you know, and jive, you know, because really there is nowhere in the world you could have people in Ireland, Irish Times, you can have people in Germany, all coming out from Mumia, people in Australia, you got people in South Africa with the African National Congress and COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, all coming out for the support of Mumia, people in Nicaragua, people all over, white people here. Asians here, all kinds of people, Latinos, everybody on the place, and then you go to a group that calls itself embodying all of the black journalists, and taking our name, you know, they believe that they're journalists, and then when you ask them, well, why haven't you taken a position on Mumia? They say, we haven't had enough time to analyze the information. How has everybody else analyzed the information, even though people who are not journalists, and you don't have a time, you're a journalist. If you're a journalist, you're supposed to be an investigative journalist. You're supposed to go ahead and find out what the situation was. And there's nowhere in the world that, even if that was not the case, that you could say that if we're talking about the brother's life on the line, the death penalty. 13 years the man has been there, articulating, on radio, writing, continue to be a journalist, and you actually question his credentials as a journalist. It is you who have to be questioned as journalists and your integrity. And then not only do we question your integrity as journalists, we question your integrity as a member of our people. Because there's nowhere in the world you can actually make that kind of statement. And the fact is that ever since Monday, when we first got on this case about Mumia, that on Thursday, that they could send out a telegram on Friday from Dorothy Gilliam, who is the head of the National Association of Black Journalists, to say the same thing that they have, and tell people they have not taken a position, tells us clearly that there's something more afoot here than even we look at. Right. Because you have to remember too, that 2 years ago, we raised the alarm when the question of Gary Graham, and as you know, who come to the Patricia Coalition program, that at the bottom of every circular that we have, no matter what the topic, we talk about Africa, we talk about the United States, we talk about Latin America, it says at the bottom to save Mumia Abu-Jamal and Gary Graham. So those are two cases. In July of 1993, the Texas Governor, Ann Richards, announced that Gary Graham was to be executed on August the 17th. And we said, that's Garvey's birthday, you can't do that. I mean, that's really up in our face. And we raised so much of hue and cry, and so much poured in, that Gary Graham is still in prison in Texas today, but he is not in the electric chair, which he would have been had that been allowed to go down. Now, 2 years later, you come back and you tell me that Governor Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania, who ran on the promise that if he got to be the governor, he would actually sign the death warrant, which Robert Casey, the previous governor, did not do. He would sign the death warrant for Mumia, and he has done that. He did it because he knew that the attorneys for Mumia was coming on Monday, on June the 5th, with a post-conviction repeal, or relief appeal, that would immediately put into motion that they had to start looking at really dealing with this question. So the Fraternal Order of Police, all around the country, particularly those in Philadelphia, went into the governor's office on the Wednesday or Thursday and told him to sign this thing so they can block Mumia. What has that done? There's a difference in status, because now that he is not just on death row, but he's on death watch. He's now in a situation where he's in phase 2, and what happens is that he's been cut off from the library. He's not allowed to have any visitors. Gil Noble was getting ready to go in and to do a direct interview with him. That's all turned up because only people who can see him now is his immediate family. So they know what they were doing. And we have also said to you before, a long time before, but now people are starting to get interested in Mumia's case. You know, but we have said all along, we said, look, they're going to test us on this case. They get ready to put the test to us to find out if we really are what we say we're about. Because we have a serious situation. If that brother goes down, we're talking about 49 days.
That's right.
We're talking about 49 days before Mumia is due to be a slave to be executed. What are we going to do? Suppose he do it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? You know, so that's the question. The question is, what are we going to really do? You know, and that has to be on everybody's mind. Everybody has to be talking about Mumia Abu Jamal. It is a responsibility because here's a man that during the majority of the time he was in prison, he did not talk about his own case. He talked about all the other people who was in there. He educated them. He allowed for them to learn. Now, a lot of people have, and we have argued this question over the years, that one of the biggest problems we have with some people in the movement is that they do not pay particular attention to political prisoners. But when Eddie Ellis comes out here after 23 years, and then you see what a brilliant mind, everybody run out after Eddie Ellis. But when he was in prison, we were trying to raise up some support for him. No one wanted to help him. Nobody was talking about Eddie Ellis before. You know, Daruba was in there almost by himself, trying to raise hell, except for some people in the movement. Now when Daruba is out, everybody's running, Daruba, can you speak here? Can you speak there? And he's always speaking about political prisons. And so what is it? We wait for something to happen, and if it works out in our favor, then we suddenly, you know, demand. There's a brother saying, I ain't got time to speak. He said, see that the brother ain't no good. You know, we got to stop that. You know, who was it that a few minutes ago? I think it was Dr. Karenga, that we're not serious. We're not serious. You know, we're not serious. That's why we all, that Utri said it. That's the reason why that we do these things. Because in reality, we're not serious. We want to get by. We want to get by at a time when they're moving to restore slavery in the United States of America. Right, Sudan. They're moving, because if you understand what's happening, that slavery, the 13th Amendment says that slavery and involuntary servitude is prohibited unless you can be incarcerated.
Right.
And they've been moving more and more. We've talked about this for years, that the only public housing program that they had in the United States, particularly New York State, is the building of new prisons for blacks and Latinos. That's the only public housing program they had. They've made an industry, it's a growth industry. You know, the growth industry of making prisons so that white people upstate can have work, and so that you can have slaveocracy to be engaged in. And that's what is actually happening. You go to these schools, you find out most of the stuff made by prisoners. When we was at the Harriet Tubman School, a lot of the stuff that we used there, we found later on when Eddie Ellis came, identified the stuff that was made there, that we utilize it because the prisoners are making. It's not just the old axiomatic, you know, making of license plates. They got the chain gang back. We told you they were getting ready to bring the chain back, so that white people, when they come back, can see you doing the work. Say that there, and it goes employed, because the only time we ever had full employment was during slavery. And that's what they're getting ready to do to you now. You're going to be a slave. They even talk about cotton is now a crop they want to look at again. Does that sound familiar to you? That's where you came in on this, you know? And the fact is that what they're talking about right now is a situation where our people are so bamboozled. What did Malcolm say? You've been bamboozled, you've been duped. You know, you've been had, you know, hoodwinked and bamboozled, and you actually are being done the same today. But this time you do it with your leadership, because most of the time these organizations don't deal with the situation. And Africa is the same thing. Here you have a question, you know, where there's a question now of the Sudan and slavery. What question? There's no question on slavery in Israel. I don't care who says it. Because first of all, the fact is that since in the late 1960s, we were working with the Southern Sudanese over the question of their being ripped off by the people in the north. And what were we talking about? The Sudan is the largest country in Africa. Strategically, because it has 9 contiguous borders with other countries and a 400-mile Red Sea coastline, it is a geostrategic country. Not besides the fact it has gold, and it also has oil, you know, and the potential that is great. But when the Sudan became independent, except for Carlos Cox, nobody looked at it because the Sudan had been programmed as an Arab country. How were they able to do that? Why were they able to do that? They were able to do it because it was a seat of Nubian, Nile Valley high culture, which everyone might know about, because the Nile River, the majority of the Nile River flows through the Sudan, because the Sudan is twice the size of Egypt and 1/3 the size of the continental United States, with the exception of Alaska. So we're talking about a big country. We're also talking about a country where you understand that color and programming and toward race and ethnicity is very, very important how you look at it. Because in the Sudan, everybody's black. No question. When I went in 1968, we went to the Sudan. And we went, and because we knew something about the Sudan's history, we were able to make contact with some people who then took us to Yahya el-Mahdi, who was the grandson of Mahdi, who upon listening to us, took us to his older brother, who was the head of the Ummah party. Imam al-Hadi al-Mahdi, the oldest grandson of the Mahdi. And we went to his palace in Omdurman and we talked to him about this question about how we were interested, and we also talked about the question that the Southern Sudanese had to be answered. Because the Southern Sudanese had been arguing that they had always been subject to slave labor by the Arab-minded, not Arabs so much, because Arab-minded, because besides just becoming a Muslim, they had to become Arabized. They started to take on the appearance and the misinterpretation of their own values by another people. And as a result of that, what you had in the Sudan is a country that became independent on the 1st of January 1956, the first black country in the post-World War II, post-Manchester Pan-African Congress, 5th Pan-African Congress period. What does that mean? It means that because of that they became independent under Ishmael al-Azari, that they became independent 14 months before Ghana under Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. So as a result of that, we have a situation where a lot of black people didn't even look at that. They were trying to figure out, well, the Sudan is not a black country, but it was. And because we overlooked that particular that item, the people in the South didn't. They've been fighting for 39 years.
That's right.
39 years they've been fighting because they say that they have been subject to slavery. Who are you to say, that they're not? Somebody said, I went there and I didn't see none. You expect to see it? Well, you expect to see it? You went, the only thing you can say is you went there and you didn't see slavery when you got there. But you can't say it didn't exist. You can't say that. And you cannot actually slander the people who tell you they lived there all their life and their mothers and wives and daughters and sons and everything have been killed in that particular situation. And you say because you didn't see it, it didn't exist. You have no right to do that. You have no right. I don't care who you are, And the question is that we are saying right now, until people get away from this kind of worship of icons, because of not understanding that any time, in order for you to become a part of another culture, you have to demean your own culture, then it's not worth it. We are not lesser than anybody. We are among the first people on the planet. The Sudan, vis-a-vis Nubia, is one of the earliest civilizations. There's nowhere in the world. And the same thing with Mauritania. You can't have the question that the Mauritanians, when they look at a person, and particularly in this society, because Africans here are of many hues.
That's right.
And so the African, when we had the convention in 1959 to abrogate the term Negro and replace it with African, to get rid of the word color and replace it with led by the Honorable Carlos A. Cooks, what we said is that from henceforth, our people will be known as Africans, irrespective of their birthplace, and they'll be known as black, irrespective of their complexion. That's important. So what you have now is a situation in Africa, because of the ill feelings that the people in the South have, that they actually are now starting to be very keen about color and complexion. That's a negative. We don't need that in Africa. We want unity, but at the same time, those black people, like in particular the Lieutenant General Omar el-Bashir, who runs the country as a part of the military hunter, and the spiritual leader, the real person, Dr. Hassan al-Tarabi, those people who said they want that Africa south of the Sudan has no culture, has the tribes, and they have to impose Islam in order to have order. That's what Tarabi is saying. So people come back and talk about don't understand what's going on. You should butt out of the question, like the Sudanese say. If you don't know what's going on, shut your damn mouth and let them tell you what's happening, because they know what's going on. That's the only way to be. So let me just leave you here with the ideas that come out of African fundamentalism. You see, because before we heard of Arab fundamentalism, Garvey introduces African fundamentalism. And what we're talking about is that on matters of particular concern to our people, our race, we listen to no other voice.
That's right.
There's no other voice but it emanates from within our group. That's important to understand. That's a cardinal rule of Pan-Africanism. And when we start talking about the Sudan, and we start talking about black liberation, we look at January the 1st when they got independence, and we look at the contradiction, because in 1804, on January the 1st, Jean-Jacques Dessalines proclaimed the independence of Saint-Domingue and proclaimed the independence of Haiti. And when he did that, he talked about that no people were ever made to serve under such horrific conditions, and that if we were to set fire to 7/8 of the globe, we would stand innocent before the prophets of history, because no one is supposed to go under such a kind of taskmaster. But Haiti got its independence, but where is Haiti today? Haiti is now, 80 years after the United States went in there, the United States domination is still in Haiti. Because they went in on January the 20th, 1915, and in a couple of weeks, it'll be the 80th anniversary. And Haiti is still under the domination of U.S. imperialism. At the same particular time, we look at the Emancipation Proclamation, January the 1st, 1863. And even when Lincoln signed it, he knew he couldn't implement it because it was never in his jurisdiction. And so it was years later. But just like Juneteenth, people didn't know what was going on. People in Africa, a lot of people who are enslaved, who are slaves by international standards or status, they do not recognize that Juneteenth has come and gone. That's what's happening in Africa. They don't even realize some of that they're slaves. They don't understand it, you know, because they were so conditioned by the past practice, and they go on doing stuff that they're supposed to. But Garvey said men and women who are earnest are not afraid of consequences, and we're not. He also said when all other means fail to organize the people, conditions will. And I submit to you today that Garvey was correct. And not only that, you have to remember what Garvey said many years ago when he said, Mr. White man, are you mad? Are you insane? Do you think you can withstand the power of Africa and Asia combined? Do you think you can actually continue to rule the world on bluff? I say to you, Europe for the Europeans, Asia for the Asians, but above all, Africa for the Africans, those who hold the floor.